day one of our efforts to replace Obamacare with something better, a lot better. And you are now looking at the team that are committed to leading that charge. 4 committees were instructed earlier this morning in the resolution that passed on the House floor to produce legislation that meets broad goals relating to bringing down health care costs, expanding access to coverage, and maintaining the doctor-patient relationship. As you know, I chair the Energy and Commerce Committee. We're coming out of the gate today with 2 actions that reflect our overall approach to replacing Obamacare. This morning, Cliff Stearns, the chair of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, and I sent a letter to the new Center for Consumer Information and Insurance Authority. We want to know about the office's authority, its structure, the extent and use of waivers to exempt some from the law's harsh mandates while applying them to others. And we wait for an early response. Second, I am pleased to be co-sponsor of legislation that was introduced today by Marsha Blackburn to allow Americans to purchase health insurance across state lines. Competition does work. We know that. And we should allow it to work for health insurance as well. And on a last note, I am a football fan. I'll confess I've been a Bears fan all my days. And I know that when I watch the Bears-Packer game at 3 o'clock on Sunday, I'm going to probably see a lot of Geico ads. Why is it that you can buy car insurance across state lines and not health insurance? We want to change that, and Marsha Blackburn's legislation does that. I'd like now to turn the mic over to a very good friend, close colleague, Dave Camp, chairman of the Impressive Ways and Means Committee, to talk about some of the issues that they're dealing with. But we haven't so long.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you very much. Well, today we really begin the replacement process and are planting the seeds to cultivate healthcare solutions that will let Americans choose the healthcare plan they want, let Americans choose their doctor, let Americans choose what's best for them, for their families, for their businesses, without increasing the size, cost, and scope of the federal government. At the Ways and Means Committee, we're going to look at the healthcare law through the same prism we're going to look at other issues through. And that is, we'll approach this issue through jobs, economic growth, and creating a strong and vibrant private sector. We're not going to waste any time getting to work. We're going to have a hearing next week on January 26th. It will be a full committee hearing solely dedicated to examining the economic and regulatory burdens imposed by the Democrats' healthcare law. We'll expect to look at the impact these new taxes, these mandates, and this new regulation will have on families, on individuals, and on small businesses. Particularly, we'll focus on the new 1099 requirement, obviously the employer mandate, and the threats to Medicare that are contained in the healthcare law. I look forward to a robust discussion of these issues in the full committee. And with that, I'll introduce the chairman of the Education and Workforce Committee, John Clark.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks everybody for coming today. We saw, I believe, in November, the American people flat out reject a Congress that jams through sweeping legislation without engaging the American people. We're starting on a process to engage our colleagues in Congress and the American people as we look at genuine, meaningful healthcare reform. The process starts, as my colleagues have already mentioned, with aggressive oversight of current law. Understand what it's doing. The stories have been coming out weekly of new objections to the current law, whether it's the 222 waivers, the shout from small businesses about the requirement to submit 1099 forms to their for the vendors with whom they do more than $600 of business. The objections are out there. We're going to go look into this with an aggressive oversight regime. Next month, we will start a series of hearings in the Education and Workforce Committee to assess the impact of Obamacare on the economy and job creation. The employer mandate discourages small businesses from hiring new workers. We want to explore that. We'll provide a forum for small businesses to express their concerns about this aspect of the law and others. We're going to be looking specifically at issues like allowing small businesses to come together and pool together and gain some of the same economies of scale that large businesses do. We're going to be looking at ideas to enhance wellness programs that large companies and small companies would like to put forward. We're concerned in Education Workforce Committee about the 170 million Americans who get their health care through employer-provided insurance. That's within our jurisdiction. We expect to work closely with my colleagues here behind me and with the other members of Congress on both sides of the aisle as we move to put forward real, meaningful health care reform. I'll introduce now Lamar Smith.
Thank you, John. I just came directly from a hearing of the Judiciary Committee. It was our first of the year on the subject of medical liability reform. And the reason we had that hearing is because according to the Harvard School of Public Health, 40% of all lawsuits against medical personnel are without merit, which is to say frivolous. And we want to direct our attention to trying to solve that problem. Today, almost every physician in America practices defensive medicine, which is to say they are prescribing procedures that have to be done, that are costly, that are also unnecessary. And when we talk about the savings that we could incur by having medical liability reform, we have the Congressional Budget Office saying we could save $54 billion over 10 years. We have 2 or 3 other third-party credible studies done that frankly put the figure at sometimes up to $300 billion. But no matter what, all the figures point the same direction, which is to say the consumers, the patients, the American people can save tens of billions of dollars probably every year if we implement medical liability reform. And we are going to do that. The bill will be introduced next week. We expect that to be considered by the House in the coming weeks. We are also going to have a hearing in the next few weeks on a threshold question, which is the constitutionality itself of the health care bill, and discuss that as well. So the whole idea here is to try to spare medical personnel frivolous lawsuits that cost them money, that unfairly damage their reputation, and that inevitably cost the consumer as well because those costs get passed on to the patients. If we can fix that problem, again, we can save the consumers, the patients, tens of billions of dollars every year, and that is exactly what we intend to do.
I wanted to ask, you guys have spent a good part of the last year or two criticizing the Democrats for focusing on health, on their health overhaul, as opposed to jobs. Do you guys run the same risk if you guys spend a lot of the next 2 years talking about the health care bill instead of talking about jobs?
Well, I just want to say our committee, Energy and Commerce, we have jurisdiction over lots of issues. Telecommunications, health, energy, obviously oversight. And we're going to be, those hearing rooms in the committee are going to be busy every day. We are going to be focusing quite a bit on jobs in the economy. What can we do to help bring manufacturing jobs back to this country as well through our Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade Subcommittee. But we're going to be looking, not only at healthcare, but at energy, all those different things as part of a plan to improve America's economy. So it's not going to be just health.
Yeah,
Fred, if I could very quickly, I think you'll find that true in all the committees. Just because we're going to be looking at the impact of this health care law on a lot of things, including jobs, it doesn't mean that the committees won't be actively engaged in other aspects of our responsibility. We don't have to limit ourselves to one subject at a time.
Well, and I just want to say that we're going to make sure that we have an open and deliberative process. We're actually going to hear from people throughout society, whether it be small business owners or others. And that was something that was lacking in the process last time. So we want to make sure that we actually hear from people. So this will be a deliberative process. It will be an open process, and one that will be very visible to the public in terms of the direction we're trying to go.
Mr. Camp, you said, a number of you have said that the American people objected this overwhelmingly, but polls actually show that it's right down the middle. And a number of people want health care reform. They want the pre-existing condition, the provision. Will you also entertain testimony from people who want this bill or who want that reform? Or will it just be the whole, let's reject Obamacare kind of testimony?
Well, we're going to follow sort of long-standing committee process where the majority and minority each have witnesses at hearings. And so I'll expect that we're going to have more than one point of think, as Mr. Klein said, the number of waivers that have been granted to unions, to businesses, to organizations, if this is such a great bill, why are more than 200 employers seeking out from under its requirements? So I think we have to understand, how were those waivers granted, under what circumstances, why were they granted? That's just one area, but obviously the overarching point is, how is this going to affect jobs, and what can we do to have a modern, patient-centered healthcare system that will actually not get in the way of economic growth?
Congressman Upton, particularly on case studies a little bit, particularly with the light bulb ban, you said that you'd actually look into it.
We will, yeah.
And now that considering we had the Chinese president here, a number of those jobs went over into China, in fact, as a result of the light bulb ban. When are you going to start looking into
Yeah, well,
repealing
we
this?
just organized this morning. We still don't have committee staff offices in Energy and Commerce. That won't happen for another week or so. I said early on that we would look at and intend to ask Cliff Stearns to hold oversight hearings on the light bulb issue. I know that on light bulbs, in fact, they are now, Philips is one company that's making them now in America and without lead, or without mercury rather. And but that's on our agenda. We'll be doing that. I just want to go back to your question earlier as well. I mean, one of the other things I said in our organizational meeting today, we intend to use the normal process to move all legislation through the committee. We intend to have a legislative hearing before we have a markup. We're not going to skip a subcommittee to get to full committee, as happened on cap and trade, as well as on healthcare and energy and commerce. And I made the point today to our members that in order of priority for amendments, when they come through, both the subcommittee and full committee, we are going to be recognizing those amendments that are bipartisan first. So that folks on the Republican side will actively look for Democrats and vice versa, so that when they can team up and have a bipartisan amendment, that's going to go ahead of the queue in terms of the other amendments that are there. So we want to be bipartisan. I know that there are members on both sides where we can find common ground and move legislation to address a number of America's woes.
Chairman, I think,
Do you expect to move the legislation in a piecemeal fashion, or do you expect there to be a true replacement bill at some point? And also, I'm curious, Speaker Boehner has not set deadlines for you. Are you guys setting deadlines for your committees in terms of getting this replacement legislation done?
I think the Speaker spoke very clearly on that. He's not putting artificial deadlines out there. He expects us to use a regular order. As my colleagues have stated, we're going to have hearings. We're going to listen to both sides of issues. We're going to do markups in regular order. And so we're going to let the committee process move us forward, and not an artificial deadline that's out there. And the question of the size of the bill still remains to be seen, I suppose, but my expectation is that we would be looking at smaller pieces of legislation that has been encouraged by our Speaker in a broad range of areas, not just this.
We've always felt that healthcare reform ought to be a step-by-step common sense approach, and that was our legislation in the last Congress. So we don't expect to solve every problem under the sun with regard to healthcare with one bill. But again, those decisions haven't been made. I think those decisions will get made as we move forward, as we hear from the American people, as we hear from people who are affected by them.
Mr. Camp,
Policy questions,
you and your colleagues have alluded, and anybody can answer, it's not just your jurisdiction, but have alluded to
I'll certainly welcome it.
association health plans have been alluded to obliquely. Certainly MedMal has been alluded to. Access to catastrophic insurance or lower cost insurance. Things have been around for a long time. Each of these things has been scored to have a relatively minor or moderate impact on the number of insured. I wonder what your overarching goal here is, whether you do piecemeal or whether you do a grand bill, if you're doing it step by step. Is the Republicans' goal in this Congress to get everybody in America covered, or is it something different from that? What's the goal?
Well, I think that our legislation last time actually sort of laid the groundwork for that. We were the only bill that was scored by the Congressional Budget Office as actually reducing premium costs. It was the only legislation. So, I think I'm not going to speak for the others, but I think one of the focuses needs to be getting the cost down in healthcare. Polls show that people are most concerned about cost. Obviously, if we can get costs down, the opportunity to afford healthcare goes up, and you get more coverage. But look, the legislation we saw, a third of the coverage is from increasing know that Medicaid is not in our committee's jurisdiction, but we know that the current path runs, obviously a very difficult one. So I think our focus will be, how can we make healthcare more affordable?
Chairman Upton, you mentioned selling across state lines. Can you give us a couple of good examples of states that have nice, strong, functioning insurance markets where you think where other states should be able to purchase? And also, how would that work with existing state regulations where they have mandated benefits and other state regulations? Would that supersede some of those state laws
Well,
in existence?
again, the bill was just introduced today. I did not serve on the health subcommittee the last number of years, but I would imagine that those are very good questions that'll come up, that'll be answered and debated within the subcommittee. And I have to believe that'll be part of that.
Chairman
Pledge
Upton,
to-
other than the 1099 provision, are there other proposals that you all are talking about where you see there could be a lot of support from your Democratic colleagues? Have you begun reaching out to them?
Okay, let me mention one. I don't know that it's been introduced yet, but Joe Pitts and Lipinski are going to be offering a bill to codify the executive order on no federal funds for abortion as part of Obamacare. It'll be a Pitts-Lipinski bill, and we intend to move that bill quickly through our committee. Again, regular order will be followed. There'll be a legislative hearing, there'll be a subcommittee markup, there'll be a full committee markup before it goes to the floor. That was a major issue, as you remember, in last year's debate.
Mr. Chairman, one of the criteria in the replacement resolution identifies reducing the number of Americans that don't have insurance. There's not a number attached to that. Where would you put that to consider what your replacement would be a success?
Which chairman are you talking to?
Yeah,
All right.
That's why I go by
No.
Fred.
We're not going to announce any numbers on that today, but obviously insuring more people is a goal, but I think one way you can get to that is reducing the cost of healthcare. And unfortunately, the bill that passed actually increases healthcare costs for businesses, employers, and families, and individuals. So we want to go the other direction on that. We think we'll be able to cover more folks. And will we be able to do it all at once? No, there may be a series of bills and legislation dealing with healthcare reform, and that way, as its impact is felt, then whatever adjustments or changes can be made as the process goes on. I think with the more than 60 regulations that have been passed already on healthcare reform, it's going to be very difficult for people to understand exactly what their concerns are. And we just want a whole different approach to healthcare. Where this is a government-centered approach, we'd like to see a patient-centered approach. And that's why we thought it was so important to repeal the bill. The tree is rotten, you cut it down. And if we can't cut it down and succeed doing that all at once, we'll prune it branch by branch. But what we want to do today is talk about the seeds that we want to plant to get the kind of legislation that will actually be more affordable, cover more folks, and not get in the way of people's ability to live their lives.
Can I just add just for a second? We're very resistant to the notion of putting a number like that, any number out there. What we saw, frankly, in Obamacare was this desire to put a very large number, more Americans insured, and what it led to, as Mr. Camp said, was adding 15 million to Medicaid. So that'll get you a bigger number, but it really doesn't do anything about lowering cost and opportunity. So our approach has been all along to look at lowering the cost of healthcare and allowing more people to be insured. And putting an artificial number out there, we think is a dangerous step to take that leads you to that sort of disaster. And I know Lamar wanted to say something.
Speaking of reducing healthcare costs, and I hope we all can agree on that and agree on the benefits to the American consumer and the patients, let me make one more pitch for medical liability reform, because that is going to reduce the healthcare cost for every individual. The Congressional Budget Office says that if we implement medical liability reform along the lines of the bill that we're going to introduce next week, that will reduce individual premiums 25 to 30%. That is a huge discount for every American with healthcare insurance if we implement medical liability reform. So that can have a direct impact and immediate impact.
Question is
Just one more. But beyond that, how do you reduce costs? What are the major pieces that you would implement that's not already in the law to reduce costs?
I think there are several. The question was, how else do you reduce costs besides medical liability reform? That's a big chunk right there. But for example, we offered last time, and we will be discussing and debating in regular order association health plans, small business health plans, which allow small businesses to pool together and get economies of scale and some of the same protections that large businesses do, including some protection from the issue that you discussed a minute ago about individual state mandates. So that's the kind of thing we want to look at. We want to open it up. That clearly will allow businesses, for small businesses in this case, to provide insurance at lower cost. Can I just can't pass on this. I never get the last word when I'm around Chairman Upton.
Are you for the Packers?
I'm just going to say, I'm from Minnesota Viking country, and it's a rare, rare day when I find myself a Packer fan, but they're going to win.
Attorney Canfield,
That's it.
physician payment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.